being African myself and at one time young, it is always refreshing. Wonderful reminiscences one can relate to as I meet with, talk to, get to know, and be inspired by the people I meet here. This is an oasis of creativity, ingenuity, and freshness. It's wonderful. You know, in Botswana, we are faced with the challenges that many nation states are faced with. It's to do with how we adapt and how we manage to reduce the risk that's associated with development. And a lot of it is to do with the amount of CO2 we emit to the air, which is a threat to our environmental ecosystem. And so in Botswana, what we have chosen to do is develop a new climate policy in 2021. But we've actualized the policy because we've got a plan to it. Part of the plan is a commitment to make sure that we increase our uptake and use of clean energy technologies. And so part of our deployment has been to, our determination has been to increase such from 2% to 5%, but then particularly with the area of electricity generation, we've been heavily dependent on thermal power production, which uses a lot of coal, because we have abundant coal reserves. And that's what we use for our base load production, which drives our domestic economy and drives our industrial agenda. And the advantage of geography has been that Botswana finds itself being in a location that presents some of the best solar irradiation positions in the world. And so we want to take advantage of this. And we had before an integrated resource plan that primarily gave prominence to thermal power production. We have adjusted since in response to meeting the global targets as set out in the SDGs, so that we rev it up to 30%, we're determined, by 2030 would be clean energy production, primarily solar. We have been motivated by some of the results we've gotten from our wind studies. So we'll be putting up some wind turbines and gas, natural gas, for the production of electricity. And with an enhanced capacity to develop electricity from solar, given our scattered population, sparsely populated in some areas, quite far away from the grid, a grid which is expensive to deploy and not as efficient, we're actually looking at the development of standalone solar power systems in some of those locations. We are also looking at collaborating and developing partnerships with some of the leading global tech innovative companies and institutions, some of which are investigating and have shown promising results of replacements to the regular grid that we have. And with these, when these are found, who knows, we might be able to participate in the hydrogen space for energy production. And that would certainly be incredible in its capacity to move the dial. And I happen to be privileged to be a leader in this time, in this century, when the world, my country included, is faced with the problems that bedevil us. And so one has to be focused and purpose-driven. Otherwise, you have no business being a leader. And being purpose-driven, relevant, and focused means you've got to respond to your demographic realities. Our demographic realities point to an essentially youthful population with aspirations that which we cannot meet the needs of if we go the regular route. This begets a demand for us to adjust, rivet, step up, and do things different. So transformational leadership is not a luxury, it's an essential necessity. With respect to power generation, one of the things that I believe very strongly in is we're never going to get economic inclusion without deployment of electricity to the people. So you've got to lower the cost. So you've got to challenge the means by which the cost is arrived at. That's a unit cost. You've got to make sure there is social justice, where there's compensatory financing for those who can't afford, through policy, and part of policy would be fiscal policy. You've got to make sure that the electricity, once deployed, is usable for productive means more than anything else. And part of productive means, a prerequisite to production, is just being able to see and read, whether it's for medical purposes, whether it's for safety and security, whether it's for reading, literacy, computation. And this brings about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for many who have never had to be able to compete with those kids who have otherwise been privileged. And so in Botswana specifically, we have developed a policy recently where we have zeroed the cost of electrical connection. So all you need to do is present your certificate of ownership of a piece of land, right? And owning a residential property in Botswana or land is free to citizens, for citizens. You present that, even if you have built a temporary structure, that's good enough. You put your application in, we have what's called a ready box, and you get that also plugged in for free, and you can put in your first light in your life. So what we do is we calculate the return on that in the cost of the tariff over time. But we rebalance it so that everybody has it. And then, of course, like I said, we do deploy solar, electricity to places that are off-grid, etc. We, in the developing world, suffer the most of the worst of those. And we pay for that through every means possible, including being made to pay by the financial institutions whose standards of measure for access to credit have included in there our ability to not emit. Right? And that would stall and put us on the back foot our capacity to industrialize. So there's a whole framework laden with unfairness in an attempt to address a problem. But the problem persists. So it's not that we are not committed to making sure we reduce carbon emissions, but the question has got to be asked and an answer demanded. If you are to inflect and make the most significant impact in dealing with a problem, where should you act first and most? Is it among us or them? Without taking away the need for everybody to take action. And I would hazard to suggest that we continue to pay a bigger price in even an attempt to resolve problems that are the responsibility of those developed. And I think this is causing a humanitarian crisis. It's a lack of justice. It brings about sustained inequity globally because we've been pushed down and we keep getting pushed down even more in an attempt to rivet. What's worse is, particularly through the financial institutions, in those opportunities that are natural, that present themselves in their capacity to respond most, such as solar irradiation. Guess who wants to occupy the place of opportunity to respond to those the most? It's not our financial institutions, It's not our countries. It's some of it through borrowing and some of it through supposed assistance on a bilateral nature that would result in the ownership of those inventions and their use being off-boarded and not with us. And I reject that notion. I think it's a colonizing notion. It doesn't matter how long it takes us. We will wreck our brains and you will popularize our thinking and we will respond in ways that make us relevant and be equal at the table of solutions of the world. Well, there are a number of opportunities, none of which in and of themselves is sufficient. And so we look beyond state parties, in my view, because our states remain small, vulnerable, and uninfluential in the larger scheme of things. But the non-state actors, such as you, in the media, in the framing of the question and challenge, not just in the South, but particularly in the framing of this challenge in the North, is what's going to make a difference. So more than even the state entities, you and your colleagues in the media have a massive democratizing role to play.